There are monsters in this world. Creatures that will leave a shadow on your soul.
He's a very persuasive man, the Count.
He's a monster.
One might almost say seductive.
This is devilry.
It's worse than that. It is the devil.
You have no idea. I'm going to destroy everything and everyone you love. And I will drink my fill.
I've studied the legends. I know who you are.
Spare me.
I'm undead, I'm not unreasonable.
Welcome back to Geek Channel 8. I'm Eric.
And I'm Rosie.
This week, we dive into the second BBC Dracula. We already watched one BBC miniseries, Dracula, from 1977. This is the second BBC miniseries called Dracula that came out in 2020. But before we get into that, what have you been up to, Rosie?
So I'm still watching True Detective, and I'm still on season 3. I'm about to watch the very last episode, and I still don't know which direction this is going to go. I can't speak highly enough of this. I feel like it may even be Stephen Dorff's probably one of his best performances that I've seen so far. So yeah, if you get a chance to go through and watch that series, every season is different. It has a different storyline. It has different characters, and it's produced by Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey. So you know it's good. Great performances, great storyline. I mean, every episode you still don't know which direction it's going to go. It is a murder mystery, and just chef's kiss. So good.
I started True Detective a long time ago, like when it first came out, and it didn't really connect with me. I watched 2 or 3 episodes. I was bored by it. I immediately went into it a little bit prejudiced because I'm a fan of genre fiction, and I like tributes to genre fiction that are true tributes to genre fiction, and I hate when people try to make a tribute to a genre and it has nothing to do with that genre or very little to. This was why I was very prejudiced initially against Quentin Tarantino's movie Pulp Fiction, because it actually has very little to do with the pulp era, the pulp fiction. He did it again with True Romance, which had nothing to do with like the True Romance comics. True Detective is a genre of detective magazines from the 1950s. And so I'm like, okay, this is going to be like a 1950s noir detective thing. And I watched it, and it was like more like set in Texas or something, and a lot more like, it reminded me of, they were finding little stick figures and stuff hanging around like very Blair Witchy, and I'm like, okay, this is more like something out of like the X-Files or like the movie California, like weird murders kind of thing. Like, this isn't really in the true detective genre.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of like, I was sort of biased against it to begin with. And then, well, I love Woody Harrelson. I was watching it, and I got kind of bored and lost the thread of it very early on. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? And like, I got like 3 episodes in or something. I don't know, 2 or 3 episodes in. And I was like, there's not enough detecting going on in this detective show.
Right. Well, it does build up, and all of those things add up over time, but it is kind of slow going in some parts. But if you watch it all the way through, it makes sense why it does it that way. The series makes sure that all of the pieces are in place to get to the ending, because the ending is a plot twist. And once you go back and calculate all the clues and all the things that are picked up here and there along the way, the ending makes sense. So it's definitely worth watching again.
I'm sure I'll have my media geek cred take a blow from not being a True Detective fan, but it was I think I started it coming off of Breaking Bad. And so I had really
Mhm.
high expectations, and I'm like, okay, Breaking Bad hits the ground running, right? There's
Right.
like the raid, and Jesse Pinkman like jumps out the window, and all of that, happens
Mhm.
within the first
Mhm.
episode or two. And then it's off to the races. You can see that Walter White's going down that road. Whereas True
Oh, yeah.
Detective definitely seems to be much slower, which can work for me. Like, I feel like Deadwood was slow to start, but I connected with it faster. Maybe it's because there were more characters introduced earlier, and it was a slower burn too initially. But for some
Mhm.
reason, I caught that in a way that I didn't with True Detective.
And Deadwood was a lot more animated. There was a lot more going on visually in Deadwood. So I see where you're coming from there.
I guess I had really high expectations for True Detective because it's an HBO series. And if we transport ourselves back a decade or whatever it was, they were coming off The Sopranos, and they were coming
Mhm.
off all these really good A level series. And
Right.
so I was expecting it to be like that, which I guess it is. I got to give it another chance at some point.
Yeah, you
So
definitely do.
speaking of crime, I have been listening to a true crime podcast, but not a true crime podcast in the way that you think of true crime. So again, much like True Detective and True Romance is a genre, true crime is a genre, and people expect a certain thing from it. And this I discovered through true crime podcasts, but it doesn't fit into the more lurid true crime, genre, although it is true and it does involve crime. And that
Uh,
is Slow Burn, which is about the Watergate break in.
Oh, wow.
And if you think you know the story of Watergate, you probably do. You probably remember all the stories in the media, or if you're too young for that, you learned about it in history class, or you know something about it. But this show covers a lot of the things that weren't covered by the media at the time, such as some of the more minor characters that were involved in it and what their involvement was. And by characters, I'm not just talking about the burglars, I'm talking about the reporters that were covering the story. Like, Leslie Stahl, who's famous from 60 Minutes, it was like her first ever assignment. But
Oh,
they
wow.
they gave it to her because it's like, okay, she's young, she's like, let's face it, she's a woman. It's like, let's just give her this insignificant Watergate story to cover, and of course it
Right.
ended up being like this huge thing. She's one. It also covers the wife of one of the people involved in the cover up, who they basically kidnapped and drugged to keep her silent about it.
Oh my
um
god.
yeah, there's all these things that I never knew were part of this story. So I highly recommend Slow Burn, if you
Okay.
get a chance. All right. So that being said, let's get into the 2020 version of Dracula. We're not going to go into the history of 2020 because it just happened and we all remember what 2020 was like.
Oh, I know. I mean, when you pull up 2020, it's nothing but all about COVID, Trump impeachment, Biden getting elected, and then people fighting mask mandates. That's 2020 in a nutshell. It was the shortest, longest year in US history.
I specifically remember like March, which is when the lockdown started,
Oh,
seeming
yeah.
like it lasted forever. It was like the longest March ever. Stuff that people were talking about at the start of March and at the end of March were completely different.
Yeah, that was a crazy month for me. Rob just bought me my car off of a family member. I love my car. It's kind of an older model, but she doesn't have a lot of miles on her, and she's been real good to me. And the first thing I did was I grabbed my kids and we went to North Carolina and visited my grandma for her birthday, the weekend of the 6th and 7th. And that Sunday, I'm so glad I was able to go down there because that Sunday they shut her assisted living home down to visitors because of COVID. And that was the beginning of it all for me. So, like the day I was to drive home, I was just gonna stop in and see her one more time, but they closed it down, so I couldn't. So that weekend was the last time I got to see her, and she passed the day Joe Biden was inaugurated, which, my family's full of Republicans. So, of course, my uncles were joking that she just couldn't handle having a Democratic president. So she pieced out. But to be honest with you, I think she probably would have liked Joe and wouldn't have said anything because she probably would have hated Trump. So, because she was a Reagan type of Republican, not a Trump
Yeah.
type of Republican. And they are very different.
Let's talk about this show, which kicked off 2020. Literally, it premiered on January 1st, 2020. So the writers here are Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat, which should be familiar to fans of Doctor Who or Sherlock. It was actually on a train ride to or from a meeting about Doctor Who that they came up with the idea for Dracula. Or maybe it was a train ride to or from a meeting about Sherlock, one or the other. Anyway, they come up with this idea and they wanted to make Dracula the central focus of a miniseries about Dracula. Whereas in other versions, he's sort of this, I think they described it as a, quote, shadowy villain for more traditional heroes to overcome. They wanted to do the same thing they did with Sherlock, which was take some of the details from the original novel and add their own spin on it, and then cut some stuff out, add some stuff. Filming began in early March of 2019 and was completed in August of 2019, early August. So it took just about 5 months. The exterior shots of Castle Dracula were filmed at, and here goes pronunciation, Orava Castle, which is situated on this high rocky mountain above the Orava River in the village of Oravsky Podzamak, Slovakia. It is the same castle from the silent Nosferatu 1922.
Really?
Yeah. So the opening title sequence was by Peter Anderson's studio, and it was nominated for a BAFTA award in the television craft titles and graphics category. As I said, it premiered on BBC One on January 1st, 2020. And then it was broadcast for 3 consecutive days. So January 1st, January 2nd, January 3rd for the 3 episodes. And then on January 4th, it went to Netflix. One notable thing about promoting this, BBC's marketing team collaborated with a company called Talon Outdoor, and they constructed billboards that were stabbed through with wooden stakes.
Oh,
And
that's awesome.
they were designed so that they would cast a shadow of the Count after sunset.
Okay.
And below the billboards was a stake inside a case with the label, "In case of vampires, break glass."
Nice.
So they put them up on Brixton Road in London and in Upper Dean Street in Birmingham. And the billboards won a number of awards too. They got the gold of the Outdoor Media Awards for visual craft, and the Outdoor Media Awards Installation Experience Award, they won the gold. And they also were the Grand Prix winner for Outdoor Media Awards. The show also was nominated for other awards like the Best New Drama on the TV Choice Awards. Claes Bang, who played Dracula, was nominated for Best Actor in the TV Choice Awards. And then in 2021, the show Dracula was nominated for the National Television Awards, Best New Drama, and the Saturn Awards, Best Television Presentation under 10 episodes. That's kind of the background to the production of this show. Let's jump into talking about it. The first episode is called The Rules of the Beast, and it was directed by Johnny Campbell. It was written by Gatiss and Moffat. So it opens, Jonathan Harker is traveling to Dracula's castle in Transylvania to assist with the property purchase in England. There is a Doctor Who Easter egg here. Mina, in her letter to Jonathan, mentions an, quote, adorable barmaid from the Rose and Crown. So Clara Oswin Oswald worked at the Rose and Crown in Doctor Who's The Snowman episode, which is set in Victorian England and was written by Stephen Moffat.
Okay.
The next thing that happens is, he gets there and we have the dinner with Dracula, which is similar to other versions of this story. In fact, it's extremely similar in a lot of ways to the Bram Stoker's Dracula that we just watched.
Yes, it is. Except like when he opens the castle door, just massive amounts of bats fly out. And that was an ominous sign.
Yeah, I was kind of like, that might have been like a moment when I'd be like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll like get a room at the Radisson or something,
I would have thought, like, does anybody really live here?
They have dinner, or he has dinner, and Dracula's old looking and talks to him looking down from the balcony, and it's very reminiscent of Bram Stoker's Dracula, which did that, the Francis Ford Coppola film. And there's a reason for that. Each one of these 3 episodes is a tribute to a different previous Dracula. This first episode is a tribute to Bram Stoker's Dracula. Gary Oldman's portrayal of Dracula in specific inspired this.
Everyone! You can tell.
You can tell.
Yeah.
And also, as another little Easter egg here, Johanna let us know last time that the theme to Bram Stoker's Dracula pops up in a lot of other things. She mentioned that. One of those things is this show. From time to time, you will hear the theme from the 1992 Bram Stoker's Dracula in this version of Dracula. So that theme underlines there. He, of course, says the words, I never drink wine.
You said you didn't drink
Wine.
So the undead do a lot of sleeping in boxes in this. And I've said I never drink wine. I think that wine tasting and wine snobbery just gets under my skin. So I am here to let you know what to pair with this film that wine snobs would look down their nose at. And that is boxed wine. Since we have a lot of undead in boxes, I figured I would have boxed wine. This is wine that comes in a bag that's inside of a box. And for some reason, wine snobs look down their nose at people who drink wine that comes boxed. Although taste tests have shown that in a lot of cases, people can't taste the difference or sometimes think that the boxed wine even tastes better. So what is boxed wine? That comes in a bag. And that bag usually has like a control valve to release the wine, and it is inside a box to make it easier to carry. It's sometimes called cask wine. It was invented by Thomas Angove, a winemaker from Renmark, South Australia. He patented it in 1964. His company used polyethylene bladders of a gallon, and they were placed inside corrugated boxes. The original design required that consumers cut the corner off the bladder and pour out a serving of wine, according to Wikipedia, and then reseal it with a special peg. This design was based on a product already on the market, a bag in a box used by mechanics to hold and transport battery acid, unquote. Later on, a tap was added, and it's a very inexpensive way of packaging. While wine connoisseurs look down their nose at people who drink boxed wine and boxed wine in general, there are a lot of advantages to boxed wine. One is that it keeps the wine good for longer. Once you open a bottle of wine, you pretty much have to drink it either that day or if you've refrigerated it within a few days. Boxed wine, on the other hand, can last for weeks, especially if you refrigerate it. It's also much more environmentally friendly. It has, again, according to Wikipedia, 12% to 29% of the carbon footprint of bottled wine. The Scandinavian state, again, according to Wikipedia, analyzed the environmental impact and said that it was found to be superior by every other ecological criterion besides carbon footprint. It's also easier to store and transport than bottles, and it's lighter and cheaper than glass bottled wine. Also, supposedly, it's not subject to cork taint. So there you have it. I'm going to recommend just get a box of wine if you're going to drink wine and have that. It's lighter, it's cheaper. If you don't finish it, it's going to last longer, especially in the refrigerator. And honestly, a lot of people think it tastes better because the wine is not subject to oxidation once it's been open.
You said you didn't drink.
Wine.
There's a really fairly extended stay here compared to some of the others. And during that time, Harker gets older and older looking while Dracula gets younger and younger looking. This is like one of the dumbest Harkers we've had, because I'm like, all these things, like, they're not very subtle, like bats flying out the front door and this, and like some of the other Harkers you could see where he might agree to stay for a month or whatever, but this one's just like bam.
Well, he didn't get to agree to stay for a month. Dracula told him that his bosses agreed that he should do that so that Dracula could learn the ways of the Englishman, learn his English ways and learn to speak English, learn to speak better English from Mr. Harker. So Harker learned real quickly that he didn't get the choice to leave, that he was basically being held hostage there.
Well, at some point he must have been bitten by Dracula. It's never, I don't think it's actually shown in the beginning of this. We don't find out until much later. But
yeah, that his dreams weren't really dreams.
but yeah, he's like, he eventually, we get to a point where the show switches to the convent itself. And then he's being interviewed by a woman named a nun named Sister Agatha, and another nun whose name we're not given. And they're asking him, and he's relating to this all, and the story is told in flashback. And so he eventually explores the castle, unlike most versions of Dracula, where he finds, first encounters the brides and then encounters them sleeping in their caskets. In this, it's like a straight up horror show. Like, there are zombies in this castle. Like, there's one woman who's one of the quote unquote brides who's being kept captive inside of a box, and like he feeds her. We do have the baby feeding scene.
Yep.
But then it's like also some kind of weird experiment because he wants to find out what happens when a vampire bites a baby,
Yeah, and he's real nonchalant about it too. He's like, yeah, I think I'm going to just keep this around for a little while and see what happens.
So, yeah, we get a vampire baby that's very reminiscent of like It's Alive, or one of those early scary baby movies from horror movies from the 70s.
Yeah. And these zombies are they're literally the undead. They're not they're in limbo in between being human and being vampire, and they're not living, but they're not dead. So you get this whole zombie thing. But one thing we do know is that they're hungry, which is scary.
Yeah, they are much more like zombies. So they fit a lot of the zombie tropes rather than the vampire tropes. We get another little reference to something here. Sister Agatha at one point refers to her friend detective in London in quotes. And there's some idea that might be Sherlock Holmes. Of course, Gaddis and Moffat were the producers of Sherlock, but the actress that plays Sister Agatha, Dolly Wells, was in Murder Room's Mysteries of the Real Sherlock Holmes from 2000. So she was actually an actress that played in one of the Sherlock Holmes films. So basically, it could be argued, there's a fan theory here, that this Dracula and the show Sherlock all take place within the Doctor Who universe. Like this is
Oh.
all one universe, since there's references to each other in them. Anyway,
I wasn't aware that there were references to Dracula and Sherlock and Doctor Who, but I like Doctor Who, but I haven't watched a lot of Doctor Who, but if it's on, I will sit and watch it. It's one of those things like I'm just geeky enough to love Doctor Who, but I just never cross the threshold of having to watch every episode and becoming a major fan. But I do love Doctor Who. So don't come at me. I do love Doctor Who. I just haven't watched enough of it. Okay. Thank you.
I don't know if I'm considered a Whovian or not, a Doctor Who fan, because I've watched almost none of the current series. However, I watched almost every episode, if not every episode, of the original series. So does that make me a fan? I don't know. Like that's hundreds of episodes I've watched. So you do the math, you know?
Right. You figure it out. Like
Does that count as being a fan? Like, I think we've reached a point where, like, the term fan, it's really difficult to determine what a fan of a thing is. Because if you had asked people back in the 1980s, like, they would say, yeah, of course you're a fan. You went to see the Doctor Who celebration when it was on tour of PBS stations. You met one of the actors from the show, and got her autograph, all those things. That qualifies as a fan. But does that qualify as a Doctor Who fan today? I don't know,
right.
Okay, so it's eventually revealed. One of the reveals that's toward the end, but I'm going to go into it here now, is that the nun, the other nun who we didn't have the name of, is Mina. And it shows that he has lost a lot of his memory. We also find out that he's actually been bitten by Dracula and is himself a zombie, which explains why his fingernails are falling off and he's got sores on his face and stuff like that.
Yeah.
He's in this, I said he was like a very Renfield like Harker in the convent. And it turns out, yeah, because he had been bitten, now it made sense. And the open sores and stuff like that definitely were reminiscent of AIDS lesions to me.
They were. Yeah, and even in the when they're like, well, I don't understand why you're still here, and he's like, because I got away. So it makes me wonder if the zombies that he found in the boxes in the castle weren't in more advanced stages like he would have been if he wouldn't have escaped.
Yeah. And so I want to point out that this has some of the classic Dracula movie lines. The dialogue over dinner felt very natural and realistic in this. It's got some really good quotes like, where there is flesh, there is flies. But what I liked about this is it was rewritten in such a way that a lot of things felt more natural and made more sense. Like, for example, when he's picking up the broken shards of the mirror Dracula smashed, that's how he gets cut rather than via shaving and stuff like that. It's a little detail, but it makes more sense than past versions where the mirror smashing and the cut were two separate things. They just found a way to combine those two things into one. And we've talked about how the mirror thing was always weird, overdone in a lot of the other ones.
Right. And then Dracula's like, oh, I'm afraid I don't have any of those things here. And, thinking back on it, John Harker only notices as the movie goes on, he only notices that he's getting weaker, but he can't figure out why. He doesn't get to see what he looks like in the mirror. So he has no idea how bad he really looks.
Yeah. And again, I think this one more than any, they were going for the AIDS thing because she says at one time, clearly you are contaminated. And the nuns want to know if he had basically gay sex with Dracula.
Yeah.
They ask him if he had sex, and his lesions look like AIDS patient. He looks like an AIDS patient. He's gaunt and has the sores and all of that. So it's anyone who's seen that, I don't think could not make that connection.
Right.
But there's just some very clever rewriting going on here. Like when he asks if there's anyone else living in the castle, he says,
There's no one living here.
Yeah.
like, no
They're not
living
living.
person, right? Yeah.
They're not living. Never said there
the-
wasn't anybody here, though.
Yeah. Everything just makes a little more sense with the excellent revisions that have been made here.
One letter was basically saying, I'm going to be gone a while. The other letter is basically saying, we're leaving like today or within the next few days. And then the other letter is saying, we've arrived at a nice hotel and I'll be home soon.
Right. And he tells them that like the post is unreliable. And so this is why you should write them in advance. But, there was something about it that I thought was more believable than past versions of that. And I'm not sure what it was. So I think we're lucky Johanna wasn't with us here for this one for the baby scene.
Oh gosh,
the baby
I
scene
know.
in this one is like way worse than any of the ones before it. However, there are other things that I thought were really stretching it, like the map in the painting part. I thought there's like, it's like, how did you manage to get that, and how did Dracula never find that in the centuries of living there and all of those things, there's a
Well,
map behind the painting and yeah.
I think that if you're doing stuff during the day, he's not going to catch on to it because he's in a deep slumber. And if correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that he found that during the day. Because remember, he spent a lot of time exploring that castle. He got lost in it. And the more time he spent there, the more he started exploring it. And that's how he came across the undead. The box is full of undead. So it kind of makes me think
I'm just talking about how he escaped the kill. It's like there was a passage that even Dracula didn't know about that he found. And I'm like, how did Dracula not find that in centuries of living in that castle? Whereas Harker's been there for a month,
Mhm.
So I thought that part was a little,
True. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
also another little what might be an Easter egg, and I need a real movie geek to who has like a Blu-ray of this or something to pause it and check like back and forth. But the ring that Dracula wears looks like Bela Lugosi's ring, infamous Dracula ring. I don't know for sure because I haven't been able to but when I was watching this, I'm like, that looks like Bela Lugosi's Dracula ring. And then, so the big reveal, of course, we said is that we find out Harker is undead. But another reveal is that Mina was there as disguised as the nun. And yet another reveal is that Agatha is actually a Van Helsing.
Right.
So
Sister Agatha von Helsing.
Yeah. So Harker attacks Mina almost, and so then he tries to kill himself with a stake. Meanwhile, the nuns all taunt Dracula out and because he can't come in without being invited. So there's a big long scene out in the cold, and then eventually he goes up to the window and where Harker is and lets him know that he can't kill himself, only someone else can kill him. So he has to invite him in, which he does. And so then he goes in and kills all the nuns. But he does leave Van Helsing and Mina alive. So
Right, because you got to leave somebody to tell the tale.
yeah.
Now that I've seen so many versions of Dracula at this point, it's pretty cool to be able to watch something and be like, oh, okay, he did the I don't drink wine thing, or oh, it's the they still dropped him off for the castle driver to come and pick him up because they'll only go so far. Just the different little things that have been traditionally in like pretty much every single Dracula we've seen. They picked it up in here and they put their own twist on it too because this time it's Harker they're focusing on Harker's story and him being and his story is definitely different this time. I had watched this before, but I had only made it through the first episode in the past. So I'm really excited to watch the next couple of episodes to see what twists and turns they take with the story. So far, I'm liking what I'm seeing, and especially knowing that they've kind of tied in some Sherlock Holmes and Doctor Who into it, which is so British, and I love it so much. I'm just really I'm really thrilled to finally be watching this. And I will say this too. This is definitely a grittier Dracula. Like there are some scenes in there I just couldn't even look at. So like when his fingernails were falling off, I
Well,
wanted to walk into the next room. That just grossed me out so bad.
this brings up something that summarizes kind of my feelings about it so far, which is that it's a really well done show. Its
Hmm.
quality and writing is just really good. And it is much more modern than any of the other Draculas we've watched. It just modern cinematic conventions are brought to bear here. However, that doesn't necessarily make it better. So I think it's better in some ways, but not others. It is a better production, but it's not necessarily more fun to watch. And that is
Hmm.
kind of like I compare it to Dune, which I recently watched. We did on the show, and then I've watched basically David Lynch's Dune and Denis Villeneuve's Dune. Denis Villeneuve's Dune is a way better production. It is a big budget production with
Hmm.
it's very believable. The writing is spot on. It's much more modern and it's much more gritty and stuff like that. David Lynch's Dune is kind of corny and bad in some ways by comparison,
Yeah, it's
but
kind of
it,
campy.
it's kind of campy, but it's more fun to
Right.
watch over and over. And I feel that way about Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula with Gary Oldman and Winona Ryder and Keanu Reeves. Like it is cornier. It's definitely the dialogue is not as good. The overall production is values are not as high as this one, but it's not as gritty or whatever, but it's in some ways more fun than this
Hmm.
one.
Hmm.
So
Yes.
I think that's kind of it's an undefinable quality that I think needs to be mentioned is that just because something is a really, really good version of something doesn't mean it's the funnest version to watch.
True. Very true.
so, so anyway, that said, I don't want to make it sound like I didn't like this because I think it's a really good version and I have enjoyed it so far. There are
Hmm.
some squiffy bits, but
Squiffy bits.
yeah,
I like that.
but so far I would definitely give it a thumbs up and recommend it. If you have a different opinion, you can let us know by writing to us at GC8 podcast. That's letter G, letter C, number 8 podcast at gmail.com. If you got something really good insight to share, maybe we'll read your email on the air. Also, I want to remind you to like and subscribe and to give us a good review, like 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And also, the best way you can help the show right now is we don't ask for money, at least we haven't yet. We don't have advertisers, we don't do that either. All we would like is for you to tell somebody else about the show. And this year, we're asking you to tell 2 other people. So if you haven't gotten one other person to listen to the show yet this year,
Hmm.
please do that now within the next month or two, because in the second half of the year, we're going to ask you for person number 2.
Yeah, there you go. So don't just tell a friend, tell 2 friends. And another thing I'll add is that if you like the show, after you've listened to it, feel free to discuss it in our Facebook group. We are on Facebook. We have a group. Come and join us. We love to talk movies and post silly memes about the movies we've talked about. And it's a great way to interact with other fans of the show.
Yeah. So also, if you happen to be coming to one of my public appearances or you're going to see the Black and Bluegrass Roller Girls play and you're on the drive there, this
Hmm.
would be a good thing to put on while you're on your way to the show.
That's right. You can listen to Eric and I talk about movies and then watch me on the track when you get to the game under the name Briggs and Smackham number 11. So black and bluegrass roller derby is back. And our first home bout of the season is going to be on April 27th, and I'm super stoked about it.
Yeah, so check that out. I have sworn on the show that we're probably never going to do Whip It.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, yeah. In a nutshell, it's not realistic derby, but I'm glad it got everybody interested in derby, and it was a cute movie.
All right. So, yeah, until next time, this is Eric
And this is Rosie.
signing off.